Hello and welcome to IndieViews. On IndieViews, we speak to the incredible indies of the games industry about their upcoming or recently released games. Today, we've had the chance to speak to David Kuri of Sun and Serpent Creations about his upcoming title, Bladesong. Now, I think Bladesong looks incredible. It promises to be the blacksmithing game that we've always wanted, giving you full control over the weapons that you make. On top of that, as we talk about in the interview, the full game is also going to have a really cool sounding single player mode where you'll be playing as the blacksmith, taking your journey and making decisions that shape the city of Erin Keep where the game takes place and the world around it. So not only is Bladesong a deeply immersive sword making game, but also sounds like it's going to be a really engaging, fascinating RPG. In the interview, David takes us through everything that's going to be in the game, from forging swords to forging friendships in the community. You'll also hear about what made David want to make Bladesong, his start in the games industry, and everything that you'll be able to do in the playtest that's launching today. Yep, today. If you want to check out Bladesong's playtest, you can head over to the Steam page and request access with guaranteed entry. It's going to be running from June 17th until June 30th, 2024, so worth heading over soon. But before you request access, or maybe while you're doing it, let's hear more from David about Bladesong. Amazing. I'm very excited to say that we're here today with David Kuri of Sun and Serpent Creations to talk about Bladesong. So David, how's it going?
Going very good, Connell. Thank you for the invite. I'm very happy to be here.
No, awesome. I'm so excited to talk about Bladesong and everything. So yeah, we'll get straight into it. But I guess to give us a little bit of background on yourself and Sun and Serpent, could you just tell us like how you got into the industry and your time in it?
Sure. Yeah. So I'm David, as you know, game developer from Germany in my 30-somethingth year on this planet. I always wanted to make games since I was this tall, and well, there's a fairly big car company close to where I live, so everyone initially gets sucked into the automotive industry. Me as well. Did some fairly interesting stuff there. I'm a computer scientist by trade, so I've been working on VR and AR applications for car designers for a bit. So effectively, you could almost say I have a background in making 3D modeling applications, which definitely helps when you're making a game such as Bladesong. Right, and then at some point I focused and was working with a lot of that stuff, with a lot of computer graphics things, did some research, and I kind of remembered that I actually wanted to make games. So I made a tiny little indie game, shameless plug. It's called The Winding Path. It's a very relaxed, hand-drawn 2-hour game, perfect for a Sunday and a cup of tea. And then I joined Moon Studios, where I was for a bit as a gameplay tech lead. They have recently released their latest action RPG. It's called No Rest for the Wicked, released into early access like a month ago or something. And you should check it out. It's good, very good. Right, yeah, and then after Moon Studios, I decided to try my own luck, found my own studio, make my own weird little sword-making game, and that's what Sun and Serpent is. So Sun and Serpent is a tiny team. We're based here in Braunschweig, Germany. There's a couple of people from all over the world working with me. So I said tiny team, it's mostly me working full-time on Bladesong. There's a couple of freelancers from various countries helping out with art and audio things, which is great. And then a couple of friends and fools helping me in my foolish endeavor. I called them fools. I hope they don't mind the joke and don't leave me to die alone.
Oh, I'm sure they'll take it in the best way. No, I mean, what an interesting career to get into the industry. Like, just to start doing cars, obviously so specific, but it also really, I think often I talk about this a lot, is like when people in school or when we talk about getting to the games industry, people think there's this one very direct route, and it's like going to uni and studying computer games art, and then you go and make computer games. But that's cool to go through cars as a first step, and also then to go to Moon Studios is such an interesting one because yeah, like they feel like an indie to so many of us outside, but I imagine like internally, there's quite a team there, really. But like,
Yeah.
um, and yeah, I mean, as you say, No Rest for the Wicked is doing great stuff on our team. It's talked about weekly actually. So yeah, I can corroborate that plug to
You
check
guys
it out.
playing it? Good.
Yeah, well, my boss is loving it, and he's coming every week. He's just having
The
such a good time with it.
multiplayer isn't out yet, right?
Yeah, I think not, but it is coming, right? And that's that's a very exciting
definitely.
prospect.
The whole thing is built as a multiplayer game from the ground, so yeah, it's definitely coming.
Sick.
And yeah, what you're saying about the industry, it's actually something I like very much about the games industry, that there is, if you're smart and if you're good at what you do, then that is what is rewarded, right? It's not like in other industries that I've seen, where it's how smooth a talker you are and how fancy clothes you wear and how how you get around a network in the in your company. Maybe there's places like that in the games industry as well, but from what I've seen, generally it is like, it doesn't matter what degree you have, it doesn't matter what you have on paper, it matters what you do and what you can do, and if you're passionate and good at what you do, that's what counts. And that is really refreshing, coming from a different industry.
No doubt, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, my background's in web development, and this is it. I occasionally begrudgingly have to use it, but it's not. It was a love of games and the knowledge of games that got me to where I am. So no, absolutely, yeah, I couldn't agree more. That's super cool. And then I guess just to ask is, where does the name Sun and Serpent come from?
Oh, we had about probably 100 things on paper. I hate naming things. I play in a couple of bands, and always when we tried finding names for the bands and names for this company here, it's always horrible because nothing ever seems good enough. Nothing ever seems to capture the essence. But what I liked about Sun and Serpent is that one thing I try to put into everything I do when I make games, when I make any kind of art, that includes music as well. I like contrast. I like having light and dark, and well, the serpent as a creature of the dark traditionally, and the sun as something of warmth and brightness, but also something that burns, something that destroys, while the snake is very much alive, or the serpent is very much alive. So yeah, I kind of like that duality that can be interpreted in both ways, and that's what to sum that up, that's what I'm trying to put into the games as well when we're tackling the narrative side of things, trying to give it a bit more depth than simply telling a story, but giving people something to maybe think about then and again. That would be the goal.
That's awesome. That's super cool. I love to like incorporating a goal into the naming in a subtle way as well. That there's a lot of jokes you can make about certain game studios having like very similar names to each other, everything studios or what have you, or they go a little too far. But I love that. I love the idea of building nuance into the name and really having that as the mission of your company. Because as much as we all love games, it's a criticism that I hear a lot is that game stories have not leveled up to the point they need to, basically. And particularly in terms of nuance, we still get stuck in good versus bad in most stories. And it's so funny to think of games like Spec Ops The Line and stuff that were really impactful when they came out, and then no one really fully carried on that legacy of really questioning.
Yeah, I loved Spec Ops. And if you've taken a look at our the dialogue system that we have in Bladesong, it's very much inspired, obviously, by Disco Elysium. So we're trying to take the nods from games that actually take their narrative seriously. Now, Bladesong is a sword-making game first and foremost, so that's where most of our resources go, and the story aspect is a side aspect. It's one of multiple aspects, not the sole main focus as it is in Disco Elysium. So of course we're not going to go to the same lengths polishing it and making sure that you can, that every choice you make has an impact. That's probably not a realistic goal for us, but I think you can do quite a bit with the right approach if you're just serious about the tone of your game. And that doesn't mean giving your game a serious tone, but being serious about picking a tone, leaning into that, trying to fit some subtext, trying to think things through, and find those small little things that make it beautiful in one way or another. That's what makes it that's what gets me excited about story in games. So it's not so much there's the bad guy, you have to go punch the bad guy, oh no, here's a plot twist. Yeah, well, at that point the story is a vehicle that you need to carry the game forward. That's fair. But I'm trying to do that little bit of extra for Bladesong.
That's very cool. I really like that, actually, though, as a way of thinking about it as well, of a story being used as a vehicle versus being used as a feature of the game and allowing, like, having an impact on it and it having feedback. That's awesome. Well, we'll talk a bit more about that later on. That's very exciting to hear, though, already. But I guess, yeah, so we're here to talk about Bladesong, which, if anyone hasn't seen it yet, is a absolutely amazing looking sword crafting and blacksmithing game. So I guess, could you give us a better rundown than I've just given on kind of what Bladesong is all about?
Yeah, well, that wasn't too bad. Bladesong is a sword making game, and if anybody asks me to summarize the game in 4 words, it's like make swords, enough said. That's the core, right? We want to allow people to make swords, even if they are not professional 3D artists. We want them to make something that looks great. Now, there's a ton of blacksmithing games out there, and I've, of course, checked them all out, and some of them go pretty deep on the simulation aspect, right? You're in a 3D forge, you get to heat up the metal and put the piece of steel on the anvil and then take a hammer, and maybe you do it all in VR, maybe not. You click on it and then you select one of 20 predefined blade shapes, or you maybe, if it's a good day, you piece together the blade from several puzzle pieces. And we're trying to take that up a notch, right? We're pretty much ditching the simulation aspect. We don't set out to simulate the blacksmith's everyday life in a direct manner. In a way, and that goes back to the narrative way of things being a bit weird, we're kind of mapping out what's going on in a blacksmith's head, I assume. So when you're planning a sword, when you're working on the sword, you have that focus, right? The tunnel vision kind of working on that piece, I assume. I don't know. I'm not a blacksmith, so take it with a grain of salt or two. But yeah, that means that you can really pick your environment to work, and it doesn't have to be an anvil. It can be, but it can also be something that's more focused on just the sword. And you get to customize every aspect of it. So you can add tiny variations to the blade. You can curve the blade, make single-edged swords for sabers and katanas, and then freely assemble the whole, what we call the hilt. So everything from crossguard, grip pieces, and pommel, you can freely assemble that to make pretty much any sword that you can imagine, given that we provide the proper parts in our library. Or you can also make stuff that isn't a sword at all. So we've seen people make sniper rifles and an ashtray and a frog. So people really like bending the system and taking things to the extremes. But yeah, around that core sword making, we're building sort of narrative management game, if that makes any kind of sense. So effectively, you're starting out in an enclaved city that's called Aaron Keep, in basically a post-apocalyptic fantasy setting. So most of the world is uninhabitable, destroyed through certain historical events, and you're in one of the last standing cities that is protecting itself against outside pressure. And you're a blacksmith there, you're starting out, you manage your forge, you make swords for your customers, who could be the city guard, who could be people who want to protect their own homes, who could be, bad guys, assassins, whatever, adventurers from the outside who actually roam the wastelands. And they come to you with an idea of a sword they want you to make for them, mostly in terms of physical specs. So they don't ask you to make a katana, but they ask you to make something that is two-handed, pretty swift and nimble, and really, really good for cutting, and they don't care about stabbing so much. And then you can freely interpret that and make something inside those boundaries, basically. And then, yeah, of course, you get better at what you do. You unlock new things. You progress in your forge. after every in-game smithing day, you go to the city. You can visit various locations where you get the a story bit presented. Sometimes you meet new people. Sometimes these people might even want to join your forge. So you hire a couple of people who extend your capabilities. And these are actually written characters. So they come with their own backstories, their own little story arcs for you to explore. And ultimately, you hopefully become a really, really good legendary blacksmith at the end of the game.
Oh, well, awesome. Yeah, well, I hope we all do too. Hope none of us fail on the way. But that's super cool. I really love everything you've said there about it. It sounds like a really interesting way of approaching making a blacksmith game, because I think what you're saying about the way that most games that try go the whole way for blacksmithing, it becomes a simulation, which is so interesting to think about, because you're right. It's like, it's not also necessarily what, like, we all love swords, right? I think anybody that grew up post Lord of the Rings in that era loves swords and talking about swords and thinking about swords. And it's interesting to think that the way you've approached it is kind of the way that, like, even as a layman, you would try think about swords. As long as you know the parts of it, you'd think, well, I want this bit to look like this. I want the pommel to be this shape and the hilt to be like this. Instead of being too minutiae of like, well, I need to hammer it literally this many times, otherwise I'm going to create a fault in the iron and blah, blah, blah. That isn't exactly the fun part, I guess, of blacksmithing.
Yeah, that is kind of the idea. Like, imagine watching Lord of the Rings and you get to see all the crazy good sword designs in there, and then you can go to Bladesong and make your own spin on them, right? Or you're a kid sitting in school drawing swords on your college block, been there, and you come home and, well, you can actually make those things in 3D. Of course, you always could, right? You can download Blender, but the learning curve that it comes with is, of course, a bit steeper. And that's one of the main goals for Bladesong, is making that accessible. Now, some people say, I can just download Blender. Why would I need your game? Well, yeah, that's the idea. If you just want to have some fun and you want to make something that looks good and there's a whole game around it, so that is added on top, then Bladesong is for you. If you want to, actually become a 3D artist and make perfect 3D swords, then Blender will be much more powerful, of course, and will be the better alternative. So Bladesong is not meant to be an editor in itself, although it can be used as such, and I think it can be a gateway drug for future 3D artists. We'll see.
Well, that's what I was going to say. It really sounds like it, because it's funny. Like, I totally get that. I'm sure there's people. I'm sure any game you release is going to have a bunch of idiots in the comments, but people being like, why not just use Blender? And I imagine lots of people haven't used it, because I got to the end of making a wine bottle, closed Blender, and have never opened it again because it took so long and it was so difficult. But I love that aspect of what you've just said there as well. I think so often the best games are the games that inspire you to like take that on to the full extent. And I think there's other games that do not in any way the same way, but they'll, even like things like Besiege. I mean, not that people are going to be building their own siege weapons, but thinking about the way that the mechanics of a siege weapon go together, even just the way that a vehicle works, it can inspire. And then maybe this is it. All those games will inspire people to be 3D modeling cars like you used to do, and then they'll make their own sword making games eventually. It all goes around circles. But that's awesome. Was that so that you're saying about drawing swords in your school books and like wanting to be able to see these more visually? Was that the inspiration for Bladesong, or was it more based on what you were saying about other blacksmithing games not quite getting it right?
I guess it was kind of a mixture. So there's a little background story to this. So I was meeting with a friend, and he was going home, opened the trunk of his car, and there was a sword inside. Like, sword. Okay. Yeah, I'm gonna take it to the garbage people. I was like, what? Yeah, I've been putting it up on eBay. It keeps getting delisted, and so it's annoying. I'm gonna just throw it out. I was like, no, you're not. Gimme. And it's this guy over here. So it's a default wall hanger. It's not anything special, but I think for me it was the first time that it was the first sort-ish object that I ever possessed, and it was kind of fascinating because at that point, it's been a couple of years ago, at that point I had been playing fantasy RPGs for 20, 25 years maybe. And I never really got to see a sword up close. Right? There's swords all the time in these games. They are basically the second hero next to your player character. And they're usually toothpick sized on screen, and literally everything you do is you hit X or right button or whatever on your keyboard to swing it, and then damage number pops up. I think that is such a shame, because if you look a bit deeper into the sword and its cultural meaning and the variations of it, and there are so many facets to this thing. And some people I talk to, some people who deal with the history of swords or with classification, typology, and all that stuff, they say some very smart things. Like, usually, historically, you did not want a sword to be drawn, because once swords are drawn, one of two people are dead. Most often two people are dead, because if you have any kind of wound and it gets infected, then you're gonna have a bad time if it's like 1500 something. So the hilt is the important thing. It needs to look like you can wreck the other guy, you know. So there's like a whole another meaning to the sword as a status symbol. It's not only in terms of wealth, but also in terms of menace, if that makes sense.
Totally.
So yeah, I found all that quite inspiring. That was a little bit later, though, when I started looking deeper into those swords. And well, first thing I did after I got that sword, I looked at it up close, and I was a bit confused. And I thought, well, there's gonna be a game out there that takes the sword and all its variants, its construction serious, and puts it in the spotlight. And I looked at all those smithing games, and they do a great job at what they do, being simulation games. And yeah, I even looked for like 3D modeling add-ons or any kind of thing, like a character creator for swords, and it really didn't exist at the time. I think by now there's some examples that can be found in AAA titles, like the latest Star Wars game had lightsaber customization and these things. And there's a couple of games that allow you to go a bit deeper into it now. Not nearly to the extent that Bladesong allows you to, but yeah, that was basically where I was coming from and what I was looking for. And then when I didn't find it, I was a bit sad. And then 2 more years went by. I founded a studio and drafted up various game concepts, because I think it's very important when you're founding a studio that you're picking a concept that is a good fit for you and your skills and your team, if you have any, and where you want to go, also in terms of fan base or player base. And yeah, I'm a sucker for fantasy RPG type things, so I wanted to do something that is manageable for me and my small team and my small budget, but already points in the direction of that. So I guess that is what's driven a lot of the decisions here, because effectively Bladesong is a sword-making game for RPG players who expect a narrative, who expect some kind of progression, and who want to have the sword-making, but who would probably not enjoy your classic simulation game for too long, I guess, because there's these elements missing that make RPGs interesting, for me at least.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, there's so much there that's so interesting to hear. I mean, I love anyone who sees a problem, wants something, sees it doesn't exist, and goes, well, no one else is getting around to it, I just need to do it. I've so much respect for that. That's amazing. You know, you often hear that from like
thanks.
People like Always Sunny in Philadelphia. They always said that they tried to get acting roles for years and eventually realized they just had to write their own show, and then they wrote it and then made a success, you know.
Yeah.
And I love what you mentioned there about swords as well. I watch a lot of archaeology shows, and the swords have a special place for people. Like, if you find a sword in the ground, there is something mystical about it, even if it's just a rusted piece of iron. And you go back, like some of the oldest things, I can't remember the name of it, but there's a lake in Switzerland where all these swords are found over like a very long period of time, and it's just, they don't know exactly what the practice was, but certainly that people would throw their swords in, and it's so evocative just hearing about it and imagining people standing there throwing in their weapon of war, and the thing that identifies them. It is such an important part of identity, and you're so right. It's so interesting that very few games ever really try to like show that comparison. Even if you get a cool sword, it's like, that's a cool sword that's, you know, it's thousands of years old and blah blah blah, sort of Skyrim style. It doesn't feel like you create the sword's history with it. So that's very cool.
True, yeah. I liked what Kingdom Come Deliverance did. Very much looking forward to the second one that's coming out at some point.
Yeah,
but yeah, I think that was the only game I ever saw that showed me how a sword is being assembled, at least in its intro tutorial thing. And then, of course, the sword in KCD 1 was a bit of the MacGuffin being chased throughout the plot, I guess.
Totally.
But yeah, I kind of hope they lean into that a little for the second one. I don't expect them to, but I'm excited to see.
That's how I feel as well. We're further away from the blacksmith's son, but you think back to the start of that game and you're like, yeah, let me do more of that. Yeah, let me spend time as the blacksmith's son. Even more so, yeah. That's very cool. And then, so we've talked there about some of the similar blacksmithing games that exist. And you were saying about how it's in a lot of RPGs. Like, I loved, as in it's still there, but Mount and Blade Bannerlord is a very cool game that hasn't had enough updates, and a lot of us are very bitter about it. But one of the things it had was a blacksmithing system that isn't particularly in depth, but it does allow you to select the different parts and all this. Yep. And it's such a tease because it's almost enough, but it's just not quite there. And it's so interesting, as you're saying, with no one has done what you've done fully. So in Bladesong, are players going to have like pretty much full control over what they're building? I mean, what level of detail can they expect?
It is always the tricky question when you're making a game such as this. So we're already going quite far. You can do quite some funky stuff, especially with the blade. You can pretty much, well, not do anything. There's always special cases that are tricky to achieve. Like once people start asking, can I make a sword with 2 points? Can I put holes in my blade? Well, yes, eventually, I guess. Can I twist my blade? Well, eventually, I guess. It's on the list, but we'll see when we get to it. And then you have like parrying hooks, and then people start asking about swords that aren't actually swords, but more like, you know, your typical Dark Souls, Elden Ring, twisted, petrified greatsword club of tree branch type thing, which I love. Ultra greatsword builds are a lot of fun to play, but yeah, what is a sword even? You know, at some point. Totally. At some point you have to give it boundaries. But yeah, we're trying to go as far as we can with what's reasonable and technically feasible. So yeah, we're trying to support pretty much everything from your default museum pieces that you might see here in Central Europe to pretty much any other culture there is. So Asian swords, of course, but there's also very interesting African swords that are being brought up a lot. And yeah, we're trying to look at everything we get. We have a very active community that is super knowledgeable, and it's such a gold mine of information because people keep sending us images of these swords or just keep posting them to our Discord. And it's like, by now I've seen quite a lot, but especially in the beginning it was like, holy hell, how are we gonna ever do this? And yeah, I think by now I have a somewhat solid overview. Most of it is going to be possible in Bladesong. Some things are going to be very, very tricky, but I have trust in people to break and bend the system beyond what it was originally intended for. And also fantasy swords, of course. Bladesong is set in a fantasy setting, like not a high fantasy elves and dwarves type of thing. It's more down to earth, a bit more gritty, I would say. But yeah, we definitely want to support, you know, putting glowing runes on your swords. You can actually already do that. And ultimately also work on a magic system so you can set your sword on fire and I'm not going to make a sword making game and then not set my sword on fire. That would be foolish.
That's awesome. But about that's one of my questions I wanted to know is about fantasy swords, and then because the stuff you've shown as well is like more real life, at least in the trailers so far. So that's very cool. And yet, no doubt, man, I bet you the time you saw those African swords, and it's like, why is there curves there?
Yeah.
How on earth?
These are really weirdly shaped sometimes for
Amazing.
our understanding of a sword. Like sometimes they look like, tools maybe, but
Totally.
you absolutely can tell for which purpose. And then they have weird spikes and things in all places.
It's amazing stuff. Yeah. Oh, I love it. So, and I guess so. Then thinking about what a player is going to be doing, just in a basic sense. Obviously, you don't need to go into full detail, but if a player kind of goes into that menu, they're wanting to make a sword. What is the normal process, the normal flow for building that sword? Are you starting pommel up?
Right. So there's two game modes in Bladesong. One is the creative mode that we're also showing in our playtest, where you can, start wherever. It's like super free form. You can always go back and forth and do your thing. But in the main game, usually the flow is roughly this. You get a customer commission, customer telling you, hey, I want this and that kind of sword. Here's some physical parameters. Here's some style parameters that I want you to adhere to. And then you usually start with the blade. And right now in the main game, in the prototype that we have, or let's say current iteration, it's a bit beyond prototype stage technically. We have a very strict flow from you start with the blade, then you make the hilt, so everything, guard, hilt, pommel, guard, grip, pommel, and then finally there's a finalization stage where we're probably going to move everything, like applying polish and sheen to your blades, and then maybe grinding it to sharpness, and applying runes, engravings, that sort of stuff. So yeah, that will be the usual flow. Now things are a bit tricky because when you are, I guess that is how you would work as a blacksmith. You would usually start with a blade, and it has its little tang poking out at the end that you will ultimately put all the furniture on, so the parts. And then when that's done, you will fix them in place by peening the end. It's called a peen. It's a fantastic word. I love it. So we're trying to stick to that process. Then again, Bladesong physically analyzes your sword, and there's only so much you can tell from only the blade, because pommel acting as a counterweight, and all the weight of all the parts that you put on it, they have a huge impact on the overall center of mass and everything that concerns the sword. So we're currently going back and forth between allowing players to freely jump between those two and actually build out the full thing, versus building the blade and putting temporary scrap pieces of metal on there. So think you're a blacksmith and you actually just put a little lump of clay at the end, and you're like, okay, I probably need a pommel that's about 200 grams or something, so let me put a lump of 200 gram clay at the end and check the balance, see how this thing handles and everything. And then when that's good, note down the numbers, throw the clay out, make the actual parts for the thing. So that's a different approach, and we're currently testing both of these.
That sounds awesome. That's very cool. I mean, like, yeah, this reminds me so much of, as I'm not a blacksmith either, but all the blacksmiths I watch on YouTube and all the amazing stuff they do. It sounds like such close processes to how they really do it as well. And even like you're saying, with putting clay on it and balancing it all out, and even just the importance of balance. Couldn't be more excited to try this out. Sounds amazing. So you've said a little bit there about the sort of low fantasy or non-high fantasy world that the game takes place in. Could you give us like a little bit of background on kind of maybe what's happened leading up to the game? Something about a king falling I mentioned in the trailer?
Yes, maybe. Well, story's evolving, but the basic idea for the setting is that the last couple of thousand years, the world was ordered in a way that people were in constant communication with the gods they prayed to, and it's actual communication. So they would talk to them, and these gods would regulate everything, the weather, good harvest, keep whatever vile forces are on Earth in check. And at some point in that timeline, there was a war broke out between two factions among those gods, which threatened to basically wipe out the entire planet. And let's call them the good guys, the good gods. They devised a plan to banish divinity from Earth, to prevent that from happening. They succeeded. We have an event known as the End of Divinity, so the gods are gone, and people are pretty much on their own for the first time in thousands of years. Which means that all sorts of vile forces that have been kept in check by the gods are waking up from their divine slumber. There's a primeval form of magic inherent to the world. We call it wild magic, that reawakens and is not so easy to tame because nobody knows how, really. So that means it's all in all a pretty chaotic place to be, this setting. And the city of Aaron Keep has, for reasons that aren't really disclosed, some kind of magic barrier that keeps the city safe from the outside. There's the Masked King in ruling over Aaron Keep, and the Masked King has some kind of divine power for whatever reasons that allow him to keep up this barrier and keep everybody outside who they don't want in. Now, it's a safe place, so of course there's a ton of refugees camping in front of Aaron Keep. And there's this added pressure because Aaron Keep, they need to feed their people, right? They have limited space, very much limited, to grow food inside the city walls. And even with their little control over magic that they have, they can increase it a little, maybe. But yeah, that is basically the pressure they face. Of course, they need people to keep the whole place running. They cannot let too many people in because of the food situation. They also cannot, when there's a family arriving or something, they cannot let one of the people in and keep the others outside or something. That usually isn't, people don't like that. So there's that. There is trade between some of those cities, but it's very dangerous, very slow. So yeah, and in all of that chaos, you are a blacksmith arriving in that camp, in that refugee camp, and eventually being let into the city to mend the forge there and provide swords for everybody who needs them.
That's very cool. I really love that. I mean, like, it just goes into a lot of real life stuff about castles. That a castle without supplies is pointless, and it's all about supplying. But also, I really love something I think you used to hear more of in games because it didn't exist was people talking about like the non-hero games where you're not kind of the main character, and I love that aspect of it, especially that you're coming in to the refugee camp to be brought in. It's not like you're starting as you're the greatest blacksmith in the world. You're just a blacksmith coming in and they see your skills and they need it. That's so cool.
Yeah, I think we've started out leaning heavily into that idea. The original story drafts we had were even pretty much happening besides the player or even despite the player at points. We moved away from that a bit because we found it's very hard to write an engaging story if you're not playing an active role in it, to put it very bluntly. Absolutely. So at some point you need to leave your mark and you need to do that. But yes, definitely it's I think it's much more interesting to start not as the chosen one and then you have a constant amount of impact throughout the story, but to have some kind of progression in the gameplay sense. You get more and more mighty, and there should be the same in terms of story, I think, where in the beginning you don't have a lot of meaning, and then you build that up over the course of the game and you build your own relevance.
That's very cool. I really like that. It's a really good quote that you build your own relevance. I like that. You could a lot of games could take that and improve their stories using it. So I guess it is a fantasy world, but you've said about like we've got katanas and some sort of real life regional swords. how expansive is it in terms of real life? And then I guess like how did you pick and then research them? Because I guess you also then the second that you say, okay, we'll include Japanese swords, you then need to study Japanese swords because you don't want to put in some, Western American mall cop katana like you see.
Well, we definitely want that. We definitely want people to be able to make the nastiest mall ninja pieces of crap, if they choose. So it's a slippery slope. The game is set in a fantasy setting and it does not use real world locations, so that we are free to put in whatever we want to put in. We thought about, can we put the let's say katana parts regionally somewhere into that world, maybe historically somewhere into that world, but all you end up doing is building a parallel culture that you're calling not Japan, and putting that somewhere, and then
Totally.
you're starting to research the history and basically recreate it piece by piece in your own setting. So that's something we're trying to just not do, to just hand wave, and just put in all the parts that we would like to see in the game, that we know people would want to see in the game, and they are just there. They just exist, and we're not going to bind them to any region or history. You're free to use them. What we're maybe going to do, because the idea for the game is that you also build your own relevance, you build renown with certain factions, so there might be parts that are tied to certain factions, and I'm honestly not yet really sure how we're going to decide what parts go to which faction, unless they have a strong in-game meaning that usually doesn't make too much sense. But we're going to think about that and see how that goes. But I guess the most important thing for me is Bladesong is a creative game. I want people to be able to make whatever swords they want to make, so that means the parts have to be there. And if you want to mix like a Renaissance small sword decorative gold piece with a Viking pommel and then give it a red mall ninja blade, then well, more power to you. Do that.
Oh, that's awesome. Oh, that's cool.
People are having a lot of fun making those unholy bastards,
No doubt. That's like we were talking about the swords you would draw in school. It's like the rejected drawings that you would draw in school, but now they're not rejected anymore. That's awesome. And then so like when you're researching those swords, kind of like, are you doing a lot of reference pictures, or are you creating them one-to-one with real life counterparts? Like, how do you decide exactly on that element?
I think we're still in this stage where we're just trying to put something of everything into the game and see how it behaves, see how it's used, see what we need more or less of. At some point, we're gonna make a big database almost of reference pictures. I mean, we started doing that, but at some point we're gonna make a list of, okay, this is the 200 parts that we want to see in game. Here's the reference pictures. Let's make those, right? And then there's some technical details, because if you think of a complex basket hilt or something, of a rapier or something, what we're trying to do is break these down into individual recombinable components, so you can actually make your own complex hilts and make the combinations that you feel good about, or that you feel are particularly unholy, and just have fun. That's fair as well.
That sounds amazing.
So yeah, that's what we're currently experimenting with, making sure we got all that covered with one example at least, and then we go into full production mode and add all the content that we feel is worth adding. And I don't know how we're gonna decide. Maybe at some point we might, put that up for public vote or something, even,
No doubt, yeah.
where people can give their upvotes to certain reference images. And then comes the question of copyrights and everything. So we need to be careful not too closely to copy anything that's copyrighted. So yeah, it's going to be an interesting ride.
No doubt. No, that sounds really interesting. I mean, a fun thing to get to do, to be compiling all these reference pictures and of swords you've probably never seen. But that's
So
super,
many,
super cool.
so many. Yeah, we've
I love that.
we've taken a little field trip inside the team to the city of Solingen here in Germany. Solingen, Solingen. I don't know how you'd call it in English. But yeah, Germany's sword capital, if you want. They have the German Blades Museum there. And the museum director was nice enough to welcome us because
Amazing.
we had people in our community, Mr. James Elmsley, who is a researcher and blacksmith himself, and he made, like, he's a guy who makes typologies of swords, so he's kind of important in that field, but also a very nice guy and very approachable, and he got us in touch with the museum director at the German Blades Museum, who was then nice enough to give us a tour through the museum, actually let us handle some of the historic pieces.
Wow.
Like, he went into the back room and just got us some pieces and was like, okay, put on gloves and then try them. And I can tell you it's fairly special if you pick up like a 15th century executioner's blade with some dark stains on the handle.
Jeez, wow, yeah.
That is, yeah, that's interesting. That was
It's more
a good
than
day.
a relic of history, isn't it? It feels like it's a live part of history. Wow.
Yeah, that was really gave you the shivers.
Did they tell you before you picked it up, or were you like holding it and you're like, "What's this?" And they're like, "Oh, that's someone's head."
It's pretty apparent because well, executioner blades, they are blunt they have
Totally,
this blunt
yeah.
point, and they usually have engravings all over, like, may God forgive the sinner, but now he's being punished and will go to heaven or hell, and may the Almighty decide, or something. And yeah, we just saw it was a light handle, so some light leather wrapping or whatever on the handle, and we just looked at it closely and was like, oh, okay, is that a stain? Where's that coming from?
That's crazy.
Yeah.
Wow. Amazing thing to get to see, and totally what a sort of, again, childhood dream to get to actually handle them, because this is it. Most of the time you're just standing looking through glass, or like 10 feet away, even if you're lucky to not have glass between you, just going, I wonder what it feels like. I wonder how heavy it is, you know? It's amazing.
Yep. Yeah, that was great.
No doubt. Oh, I need to start working on a sword game so that people will invite me to go to like Kelvin Hall and I can go see it. Kelvin Grove.
Yeah,
Oh,
I wonder
amazing.
if I can get through this without buying a sword or two.
I don't think that's possible. Yeah.
I think not, no.
Well, or you've got to wait long enough till someone gifts you one and then you say, look, I designed this in the game and I've really forged it.
Yeah, well, maybe I can convince... we're currently looking for a publisher, so whatever publisher we end up signing with, maybe I can convince them to do a marketing stunt where we, have some blacksmith do that and send it to me afterwards, obviously.
Like the good old days when like Blizzard would make Frostmourne and bring it out and stuff like this.
Yeah. Well, they're
definitely.
still doing that a lot, right? I recently been in touch with the people from Baltimore Knife and Sword who do what's it called, Men at Arms Reforged.
Oh,
who make all the in-game weapons, and recently saw a video of them making Godric's great axe from Elden Ring.
Oh, amazing.
Jesus, it's a pretty big thing. I think they made 2 of those even.
That's crazy.
For the Bandai Namco offices or something.
Incredible. Yeah, I mean, what those guys do is unbelievable. It's stuff that, you see in the game. You wouldn't think it was possible in real life to actually make something that would even be, like, wieldable. And it's unbelievable in some of them. The size they get, and they'll manage to still make it light enough that a human can lift it. Incredible.
Yeah, I think that thing was pretty freaking heavy. But yeah, I mean, it's this big. So
That's amazing. One thing you've mentioned earlier on was about kind of the end of your blacksmith's day, and that you're going to the town and you're kind of making some choices, you're building the community out, and this is something that you've mentioned a few times, and that it's really cool, especially the way it combines in with what you were talking about with the way the story starts with you as a refugee. I imagine that's like the perfect way to start building a community, because you're basically around a load of people who no one knows each other. So I guess, could you tell us a little bit more about what that community building is, and then like how that impacts your life as a blacksmith?
yes, sure. So the basic idea is that you start as a lone blacksmith in your well, you start outside and you go through a bit of a tutorial, but then once you're inside the walls of Iron Keep, you start as a lone blacksmith in your forge. And well, you're not going to be alone forever. The idea is that you meet a couple of people along the way who become your trusted crew. The first guy you meet is a blacksmithing assistant. That's a given, right? He just helps you with the sword making. But then we have more ideas for making this character cast as colorful and soulful as possible. I'm taking this very seriously because I think at its core, Bladesong looks like a modeling tool, right? It looks like a very technical game. So I'm trying to give that a counterweight on the other side by making the story as human as possible and as colorful and soulful as possible. So you can think of that character cast almost like in your typical JRPGs like Final Fantasy or something, where you end up with that ragtag team of very different people, but you kind of got to know all of them. You know their names, you know their backstories, you know who they are, and they've become important to you. So the story will very much revolve around those characters. And yeah, it's going to be a blacksmithing assistant, but then there is also a bookkeeper who helps you run your forge more efficiently, and an arena fighter, and she fights in the local arena, and you can maybe place bets on her, but even if not, then she's your champion because she fights with your swords, of course. So that's a good thing for marketing. A thieving duo who can steal stuff around the city for you. So that's the idea for making it a bit more, it's not just the forging. There's more going on there.
That's awesome. It makes me think of and it's kind of like a backwards view of it almost, but it's like A Knight's Tale when they had the gang that all appears around the main character, and you've got the blacksmith there who I believe does Nike, the brand, their maker's mark is the Nike symbol in the Middle Ages. But I love that. No, I think it's really cool. A cast of characters that really feels, it's building a community around the forge. That's awesome. And then I guess you mentioned thieves there, and you'd mentioned thieves earlier on as by like maybe people that you're doing jobs for, because this is so you're doing it on requests. So are you choosing? Is there a moral quandary to these requests? Or when you're looking at them, it's more than just, can I make this sword? Is it more, do I want to make this sword for this person? Is that going to change the story based on who you help?
It's a very, very interesting thing that we're still trying to unravel ourselves. So morality or player choice through the sword making is a big topic that we're thinking about. I think we haven't quite come to a conclusion yet, because I feel personally that the decision, do I make a sword or do I not make a sword? And if I make a sword, do I make it good or bad? That's not a particularly great way to make choices, I think, especially if they have, severe impact. There's two things I'm thinking about. The one is that you have renown with various factions. So by building renown with some kind of, not so good faction, you might lose renown with others, or you might unlock, the nastier parts of the game where, I don't know, where you are presented things that aren't morally great, and now you have to deal with them, so you kind of evoke the presence of these things. I mean, they're always there in the world, but now you get to see the bad sides of Iron Keep. Kind of, that would be interesting, I think. And the other thing I'm thinking about, though that might be knee deep in feature creep terrain, is giving players choice through the magic system that we want to build. Now, imagine you have someone who will request a sword, and either they tell you or through other sources that they want to kill their brother with that. Okay, great. And now you can make them a cursed sword that, whenever they inflict damage upon somebody else, also inflicts that damage upon themselves or something. Something like that. Very cool. So if the magic system was actually that capable and systemic, that you could curse swords in various ways, or I don't know, make a love potion sword, if that makes sense. So whoever you hit, you suddenly like them. I don't know. Just
That's a great twist on Cupid's arrow. Yeah.
yeah,
That's
kind
great.
of right. Yeah, I mean, taking inspiration from potion craft a little there, where you get to make the potions for the people, and then I think what they have is some people are obviously morally bad, like they want you to make poison to poison the rats. Yeah, the rats. Sure. And then if you give them poison, then your evilness meter goes up or something. I need to take a closer look at if they maybe have a twist to that, because that would feel a bit too straightforward for my taste, at least. But yeah, I'm gonna keep thinking on that and see how it can be incorporated.
Yeah, no, that sounds amazing. And I think what you said there, I totally get why. The way that Potioncraft does it is very cool, but it's cool, but it's not particularly nuanced. You very much know exactly like what that person is there for, and it's very much it's a wink wink. Yeah, I'm not going to kill anybody, and you're like, just go away then. And it does become a bit of a binary choice that you kind of decide quite early on in the game, which you're either going good or bad. And yeah, it definitely sounds like sort of some area that you could, with swords especially as well, and then putting cool enchantments on. Yeah, I love that.
I think it works for Potioncraft because it's not meant to be a game that gives you too much of a challenge, right? It's meant to be a cozy
Relaxed
game to some extent, a very relaxed experience. And people have called Bladesong relaxed because the pure sword making is pretty relaxed, but at the same time, I'm absolutely in love with those memorable moments from, for example, I hope I'm not spoiling anything, but there's this quest in Witcher 3 where you have this weird tree that you're talking to, and then it turns into a horse and it kills this entire village, depending on your choice. So I love those choices where you really don't know whether you can trust the other person or not, and you talk to them and you're like, okay, I gotta make a judgment call here. Fingers crossed for everyone. Let's go. So that kind of stuff is what tends to really stick with me. I mean, obviously Witcher 3 has a lot of great situations like that. Fantastic writing all in all.
Totally, and but a great example, as you say, of nuanced writing, where kind of often the options, like, it's neither is like the good or bad option. Both have that kind of, they flip back on themselves, and you're like, well, do I want to kind of take an overall good choice with the bad internally, or it's bad to the creature but good to the people? That's very cool.
And even after the fact, you often don't know whether what happened is a good thing or not, right?
Totally. Yeah, that kind of ambiguity. And again, it's what, like, I imagine a lot of being a blacksmith probably was. And, we often think, you see them being asked by the sheriff of Nottingham in Robin Hood to make weapons for them or something. But in real life, like, that probably situation with a real life version of someone like the sheriff of Nottingham in the Robin Hood story probably did happen. And then you really did have a question of, well, yeah, no one's really good in this. So it's really just, do I just wash my hands of it and say a job's a job? Or do you care about the overall structure of the region from it? It's very cool. And yeah,
it's also a thing that we thought about. Like, one of the very, very, very first questions to come up when we thought about the story to write for this was, okay, you're effectively an arms manufacturer. How much are we going to lean into the moral question of whether that's okay or not? I think we decided pretty early on that this is too big of a topic to handle, totally, and also kind of a downer if the game tells you, hey, you're bad for playing me. But still, we're going to explore that on a lower level of detail, I think, with individual choices and who you're going to support. Maybe not with the individual sword, do I make a sword, yes or no, and that has a consequence, but more with this renown kind of thing. So if you keep making swords for the bad guys, I think that's the most interesting avenue there. If you keep making swords for the bad guys, you will start seeing the bad sides of the city. That's something I would really like to get into this game.
That sounds amazing. And yeah, no, I think it's the right choice not to end the game with, like, you finished the game, you're a bad person. Like, what are you doing? And totally, it is difficult because we think of, it's so interesting obviously you think of modern contemporary of arms manufacturer, arms dealer, and we also have to remove ourselves and the modern world from it and go, actually, we can't. It's such a different scale that it's hard to even relate these two things together. You think of what a single blacksmith and even a huge blacksmith forge and team of blacksmiths would be able to do. It's not at this level, and they probably didn't have the convenience of being able to question morals, right? Because you had to put food on the table. So
yeah, I mean, from chatting to people who have the historical knowledge that I don't have, it seems there were quite some enterprises that were freaking huge for making arms and armor, particularly, where the people would own the forge with a couple of hundred people working there, but then they would also own the mines where they would get the ore from, and they would also own the forests where they would get the coal from, and they would also own the fleet of ships that would deliver these things to wherever they need be. So like an ancient Amazon.
Yeah, absolutely, all the way from start to finish, isn't it? Yeah, that's crazy. Wow, yeah, it's interesting to think about that. It really changes the perception of this kind of like individual culture, everyone's a craftsman of their own thing. It's like, actually, it was the same now. Ancient Unilever.
I think that's a common misconception that you would in history, that you would have a single master bladesmith with maybe 2 or 3 people working with him, and he's making the sword from A to Z, sorry. But often, they would have a bladesmith who would just make the blade, and then you would have other people making the other parts, and then you would have yet other people making the engravings on it or any kind of decoration. So that was usually different people, and then there were, like I said, these huge enterprises where it was all really industrialized and streamlined, I imagine.
That's crazy.
So we're trying to be somewhere in between here. You're starting as the lone blacksmith who does everything, and nowadays there's a lot of modern blacksmiths who do everything on their own, right? So kind of take an inspiration from that, even if it's not historically what usually happened. So you're starting alone on that, and then you're building out your team, hiring a handful of people, the named characters with backstories that you meet throughout the story. Probably also we're going to have a system where you can hire workers, just helping hands, to really get to the point where it's like a 20 people forge, and you can now, if the city guard comes to you and says, hey, we need 30 swords by next week, then you have the people who can make it, right? You design one of them, and then you have the people who will copy this thing 29 times. So that's all stuff we're exploring. It's all late game stuff, so we're not it's not finished, but it's the direction we're thinking in, roughly.
It's very promising sounding. I really like that as well, because I was thinking about, are you making lots of swords for, exactly, city guard asking for a big order. I love the idea that you're designing it and then you've got your team who you're like, hey, here's the specs to carry it out. I think that's
yep.
Yeah, it feels very true. You know what I mean? Like, it feels like exactly what someone in that position would be doing. That's very cool. And then, so we're talking about the choices as well there, being the choices of who you're working for and the swords you make, and perhaps the way that can knock on. Are you also making choices kind of outside of your sword making? Are you making just story choices based on the politics of the region? Do you have to just make decisions of maybe an overall angle that you go?
Yes. So you can really think of the evening events. When you finish your blacksmithing day, you have a map of the city, you click any of the locations, and you can decide where to go for this evening. And there you meet people, you talk to them, you of course make decisions, branching story, Disco Elysium style.
Awesome.
Again, not quite as not trying to be as deep and masterfully crafted as Disco Elysium, but take an inspiration from it for sure. But yeah, I would call it a classic RPG dialogue system. So for one, it of course depends on where you choose to go for the evening, what kind of story you see unfold next, and then it depends on your dialogue choices and maybe choices of action. Thinking in a pen and paper type thing, the dialogue tree is not just what you say, but it's also what you do, partially. So depending on what you do during those evenings, the story will progress in a somewhat different way. Oops. I think at its core, we're a small team, so I wouldn't expect a super branching 10 different endings narrative. But yeah, you're gonna leave your mark in that world.
Very cool. Oh, I'm excited to see how that looks. That sounds really awesome. I love it. The fact there's an interplay as well between these two different choice systems of what you're making the swords, but also just your overall person and the way that you are in that world. That's very cool. It'll be interesting to see how it can change the city. And then I guess our last question about the features of the game, which is sad to say because I've loved talking about it, but it's about the perk system. And we've just said about branching dialogue there, and I'm wondering with the perks, is this going to be a branching perk system? Are you making trade-offs between certain specializations, or is it kind of expanding what you know as a blacksmith?
I think everything. So we think of these hireable characters as one major way to progress in the game. So early on in the game, you have two skill trees or two branches from your main node. For improving the forge, I don't know, buying a new anvil, buying new tools, buying some kind of water wheel power hammer, I don't know. So there's that, and then there's yourself as the blacksmith, increasing your capabilities, so increasing your profession in engraving or something. But then there's the people you hire, and they come with their own things that they know and that they can learn and bring to the table. So effectively, I think of each and every one of those hireable characters. It's probably going to around 6, I would say. Each and every one comes with their own little branch in the skill tree where you can expand what they do. It's probably, learning every single skill is probably going to be tough, but possible. You have to play for a long time to do that. In your usual playthrough, I guess you wouldn't learn all of them, but we're far from having the skill tree finished, so that is going to be up to exploration.
No doubt. Oh, that sounds super cool, though. That sounds like a really perfect middle ground. I think not enough games that include perk systems make you make choices, and it ends up being that you just kind of expect that you'll get them all, even eventually being really just by the time you've normally progressed to these
Right.
sort of milestones or whatever. So I love the idea that you actually have to make that choice, but then that you can get them all, because this is it, you are a blacksmith, a master blacksmith who goes long enough will be able to do all these things. So that sounds really cool. Perfect middle point.
I think Bladesong is not going to be a super challenging game. Being a creative game, we want to allow people to experiment, right? And pretty much whatever you do in the perk tree, it's going to be good for you. Some things are going to be better, some things are going to be less better. But yeah, I wouldn't expect that it's neither a hardcore min-maxing economy simulation game, nor is it going to punish you heavily for making the wrong choices early on. Like thinking of Frostpunk, for example, I've played that a lot, where you have the tech tree on the one hand and the book of laws on the other hand, and if you make the wrong choices in there early on, it can be really punishing. So
totally,
super different type of game, a game I love deeply, and we've taken inspiration from for Bladesong, but the more we thought about it, it's like it's polar opposites in a way, because 11-bit studios themselves told me that Frostpunk is almost a roguelike. So I'm allowed to 100%. Say it.
I'm so glad to hear that's verified, because I feel the same way. Yeah.
Yeah, I would never have said it out loud because it somehow feels very wrong, but yeah, it's verified now, so that's good.
I know what you mean.
But yeah, I mean, they expect you to fail. They expect you to try again, and basically with every run, get better and see what choices are good for the early game, for the mid game, for the late game. And that's not something we're trying to do with Bladesong at all. Pretty much the opposite. The game will work out in some way, whether you're good at the game or not so good at the game. That's not what it's about. It's about being a creative game, exploring the world, getting to know the people.
That sounds amazing. I love that. I love the aspect of having a game that's creative, but then, as you said, of building the stuff in around it to create a progression and create something that kind of feels like it's there's a world and a story and everything that immerses you. It sounds like a perfect game for like really most of us, right? I think a lot of the time when you finish work, like Frostpunk's such a good example of like a game where I love playing Frostpunk, but I think I would probably only ever play it on weekends. Like I would never play it after work because it's just a bit too much. And being able to actually have a bit of creativity, have a story that's progressing, but not be worried of, oh, I don't want to make the wrong decision, destroy this run. And especially in a world of roguelikes, as much as we love them, there's those times where you make that one wrong decision. In Hades, you pick up the wrong perk and you're like, oh my god, I've ruined everything. And I only had an hour to play games and now this is done. So
that is certainly true. Yeah, I only ever play Frostpunk in winter when it's really cold outside. it's the best. But,
no doubt, totally. I'm excited for the second one.
Yep.
Fingers crossed. But before we get Frostpunk 2, we're going to have a playtest for Bladesong, I believe, starting June 17th. Could you tell us a bit more about it?
June 17th it is. Yes, of course. So we've done a couple of playtests. This is actually going to be the third officially. It's a public playtest, so you can hop onto Steam, go to our Steam page, hit request access. There's a couple of people, I think 19,000 or something, who have taken part in the previous playtests.
Wow.
Yeah. It's going really good. People seem to enjoy it quite a bit. So if you have taken part in any previous playtest, there's nothing you need to do. The game is still in your library. It's going to be unlocked again, playable on the 17th to 30th, so to the end of the month. And if you're new, just hit the request access button before the 17th or any time during 17th to 30th. We're going to let everybody in on the 17th and set it to auto accept from there, so everybody gets to play. We actually preponed it a bit. We originally planned to launch on the 20th, and then we remembered, or we got told that Elden Ring's DLC, Shadow of the Erdtree, is coming out on the 20th. And it's so weird because I'm actually looking forward to that, and I had that on my mind, and it's like, I'm sure there was days where I, was working on Bladesong, and then I finished my day, and then I was like, okay, what else is going on? Oh, cool, June, back in private mode, back in not working mode. Oh, Elden Ring DLC is coming out, nice. But I absolutely did not make that connection that probably launching our playtest on the same day that DLC comes out, which almost everybody in our community will probably wants to play, that is probably not a smart thing to do. So long story short, we're starting 3 days early on the 17th, giving people 3 days more. That's good. People always love that, and we're happy to do it. And yeah, it's sadly, it's not going to show most of what we talked about. It's just going to show Bladesong's creative mode, so you can make swords. You cannot experience any of the story, not the shop management, nothing. We're currently working on that for quite a bit, and yeah, it's just going to be that in the playtest. But yeah, you get to make a lot of cool swords, see all the sword making features and everything we have in that regard. We're also going to host a couple of community challenges, I think, on our Discord. We did that last time. Last playtest was in February, I think. And we had some community challenges there, and people are absolutely crazy. They make the craziest stuff you would not imagine. It's so great. Whenever we put any kind of tiny little feature in, people just go bonkers, and they just do stuff I would never have expected. Like for the last playtest, we put in rune engravings, right? I was like, okay, it's not much. I'm just going to take some Old Norse runes, the Futhark alphabet type thing, make them golden because, well, gold is nice. Okay, so you have 24, is it? I don't know. I think 24 letters. Okay, it's not much, but it illustrates that we want to have engravings in there. It's not where I want it to be, I want materials to be reassignable to them, so you can have gold or silver or glowing engravings. I will want you to do some more freeform drawing on the blade as well. But okay, it's a start. Let's put it in. And then you should see the stuff that people do with it. They like, oh, there's a straight line. Good, I'm done. And they just use that straight line in 1,000 places. Like this one guy, he placed 1,018 individual engravings on the hilt to make like a super intricate pattern on this. There's a couple of people There's a Hall of Fame channel on our Discord. It's so amazing what people do.
That's
And
awesome.
yeah, very much looking forward to seeing what people are going to come up with during this playtest running from June 17th to 30.
That's amazing. Yeah, no doubt. Yeah, I guess everyone should join the Discord as well then. So request access on Steam, and there's a link on the Steam page straight to the Discord.
Yes.
But this sounds incredible. I mean, like, amazing. Good on you guys for letting everybody in. You know, it feels like so often with these things, it's you hear about it as it happens, and it turned out you needed to apply 2 weeks previously at latest.
Yeah.
So that's really awesome to let folk in like that. And yeah, I'm definitely, I've requested access. I cannot wait to play it. My brother as well, luckily, got a gaming PC, and he's a proper historian. So
Ooh.
I will be doing some very cool sword making with him, and probably getting some heavy critiques, I imagine, from him as well. But that's amazing. And yeah, hey, the games industry is probably one of the worst places for organizing anything, because no matter what you know about, there's some other niche game that has a very dedicated following that's also releasing on the same day. So
Yeah, true.
no doubt, right? Not that Elden Ring's a niche game, but yeah, I wouldn't have.
Super niche. Super niche.
Yeah, I think I've heard of it. Although I do feel like the only person doesn't play it. So don't worry. While everyone else is away playing Elden Ring, I'll still be making swords.
You'll be there. Great.
Amazing. And I guess to bring us to the last question, and I appreciate we're probably a bit far out for this question to be directly answerable, but obviously we've got a playtest going now. Do you have any ideas about when a possible release date would be? Any kind of areas you're looking at least?
It very much depends. Like, we don't know ourselves. We have some kind of schedule here on paper. We're currently talking to publishers, so that has been my last 2 months. Talking to almost 3 months actually. It's been somewhat time consuming, because we're really trying to find the right publishing partner for Bladesong, who's just as passionate about this stuff as we are, to make this game great. And I hope, things are starting to settle. We have some good offers on the table, so I hope that we can sign something next month, and then also get clarity that they think as well that the schedule that we have in mind works, and plan all this stuff that comes with it, road to market, and whatever your marketing beats are, whether we're going to make a demo or not, whether we probably are. Steam Next Fests are important, right? Totally. We're not going to be part of the Next Fest in October. So yeah, release is likely going to be sometime next year. Not this year, likely next year. I mean, one of the core questions for indies, of course, is always, are you going to do early access, or are you going to do the whole thing until it's really, really good, and then push it out to PC and maybe consoles at the same time? We have something we would want to do. We're talking about it with publishers and seeing if they feel the same way. But until stuff is signed, I'd rather not say anything about that either way. I hope we can announce things in, July or maybe August, at least, who we're signed with and whether it's going to be in early access or not, and maybe give a somewhat of a time frame.
Awesome. Oh, well, I'm excited to see it, and you absolutely guessed my next question, which was, or what I was thinking of, it certainly was early access. But yeah, no, definitely. Well, good luck with the publishers, and I guess to any publishers listening, there's still time. Send an email to Sun and Serpent. You might be able to publish it instead of some of these other guys. I think it's going to be huge.
We have to be really quick though.
Yeah, any very fast publishers listening, yeah, if you get in touch right now with an offer.
Super fast, yes. The second you hear this, drop an email to david@sunandserpent.com, and I'm going to reply swiftly. But yeah, I'm afraid we have to move fast. So if you have any kind of board of directors that need to approve things, then we're probably out.
No doubt. Oh, well, good luck with it. And no, I can't wait. I'm sure the publisher will be lucky to get it, because I mean, from the amount of people you said that are in these playtests, but also just the way that it relates to so many people. And I think it's to again go back to that drawing swords in high school idea, is when you think of a game like this, and if you looked at it on a technical aspect, if you wrote it on a sheet of paper, you might think, oh, that's for a specific audience who really wants to be modeling things and doing all that. But to what you were saying earlier on about this being an actually accessible way for people to bring their ideas of swords to life, and then also have this contextual world and things happening around it that make your swords important, and the things you're making be more than just a mode where you're just making them and enjoying them for yourself and maybe posting it online. The fact that there's a reaction to it, I think it relates to so many people. I can imagine a million people seeing this game and going, finally, like, oh, I can actually make the thing I've always wanted to make. So best of luck with it. I really cannot wait to play it.
Thank you so much for all the good words, and yeah, it's great to see that you're excited about it. So
I'm so jazzed. Honestly, it's going to be the hit of 2025. I was going to say 2024, but maybe the playtest itself will be, because honestly it looks so good.
I do hope so. We have like, I don't know, I think another 5,000 people or something waiting for access right now. So they are all gonna get a notification on the 17th. Sorry, the start is on the 17th, and then it's gonna be jolly sword making time.
Indeed. Well, anyone listening, go jump in that playtest. You will be accepted. There's no question about it. And yeah, go get making some swords. Thank you so much for joining us, David. It's been amazing chatting to you.
Cool. Thank you, Connell. Thank you so much.
And that was our interview with David Kuri of Sun and Serpent Creations about the phenomenal looking Bladesong. A huge, huge thank you to David for joining us, and a huge thank you to you for listening in. I really appreciate it. Just as a reminder, the playtest will be running from the 17th till the 30th of June 2024, and you can head over to the Steam page, which is linked in the comments, and request access. While you're there, you can also click the Discord link, join the Discord, and head on over to share your creations once you're ready. You'll probably see me sharing some creations there too, but please be kind if they're terrible. It's my first time playing the game. But anyway, again, thank you so much for checking out IndieViews. Please do check out Bladesong, and we'll catch you on the next episode.